Amazon would say speed matters in business. What I see this very important, you have to understand what is the minimum information I need to make the decision as necessary. Good executives make really good decisions and very high stake decisions, right? They understand consequences and risk of not making decisions.
Today, we have Felix Ekweme with us.
Good people think that good work gets them growth.
Oh,
Right? Really smart people assume that good work, it's all, to me, that's table stakes. Your company hires you to do good work. You have to be good at your job. That's a table stakes, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't necessarily result in you growing. People also believe that if they do enough of good work, there's someone somewhere who's just going to come and pull them up.
yeah.
Misconception, right? It's your manager's job to help you grow, but your manager doesn't wake up every morning and think, how do I go pick this person and pull them up through the ladder of the whatever company you work at? So you have to be very intentional about that. You need to have the awareness that safety is not a good enabler of success. I think Ginny Rometty at some point said comfort and growth do not coexist.
Growth and comfort never coexist. And if you're gonna grow as a person, as a leader, you gotta get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You welcome challenge, you welcome risk, because you know you come out better at the other side.
Just to start, I know you've spent some time in the military.
Oof, yes. Yeah. The one topic I thought we're not going to touch today, but yeah, let's start there.
Okay. Well, we don't have to talk about it.
No, it's okay. Let's do it. I considered joining the military long before I even moved to the US, right? I've thought about it. It's like, there's a lot of discipline. You get to do things in structure. You put aside everything that people know about you, and you wear a very different personality, and you go and you do the mission for which you're assigned. There's no other place, in my view, that teaches you accountability than the military. Absolutely. Right? There are no excuses for mistakes. And that was my number one attraction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Build. Today, we have Felix Ekweme with us. Felix wears many hats. Felix is an executive, former IC, immigrant in tech as well.
Yep.
But he also does a couple of other things. So I know he does venture investing. Felix is many things. Hey, Felix, introduce yourself.
Good to be here, first of all. So, like you rightly said, my name is Felix Ekweme. I'm originally from Nigeria, immigrant at heart, and currently work at Amazon as a technical advisor for the international seller services business. So the way I put it, my core function is to help senior executives who are in charge of helping sellers grow on Amazon succeed on Amazon, right? So this is outside of the United States, think Australia, Singapore, Mexico, Brazil. The kind of challenges you have in those places are very different, right? And the perspective I bring to this role, most especially, is to help them remove the noise in a lot of decisions they need to make so that they can get to those decisions quicker. So in a nutshell, that's my background. We can go a bit more deeper.
Yeah, we will definitely have a lot and a ton of questions. But as Okpe said, Felix wears a lot of hats, and we definitely want to try to get as much from him as possible, but also understanding that, we can definitely bring some stuff back for our future episodes. But just to start, I know you've spent some time in the military.
Oof, yes. Yeah. The one topic I thought we're not going to touch today, but yeah, let's start there.
Okay. Well, we don't have to talk about it.
No, it's okay. Let's do it.
I think from our conversation, just me and you haven't had conversations offline about running and like exercising, and you gave me some tips, about running at the time when I was training for a marathon, and so it'll be interesting to kind of like learn your background, how you got to where you are and what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the military, I think 9 years ago, right? And as a reservist, and my first role in the military was as a what they call the combat medic, right? The person responsible for treating injured soldiers. Mm-hmm. And I did that for about 6 years, commissioned as an officer in military intelligence branch. And sort of did this for a while, and I'm in my phase in and out of the military at this point. Fun experience. I wanted to do something very different from what I do on the civilian side, right? I started my career as a software engineer, transitioned into product management, became a people manager, managed product and engineering and all the analytics functions that come with it. Now in this technical advisor role that is really an IC. You no longer have an individual contributor. You no longer have responsibility for a single person. You have a responsibility for a large organization of about 8,000 to 9,000 people. So it's been a bit of a difference in what I do in the military side, kind of responsibility you have in the military. The military is about 100 plus soldiers, right? Mm-hmm. That you support typically. And it's a fun world. We can go more in depth into it, but I think high level, vastly different. When you see me on the weekend every month and I wear my uniform, shave my beard, I look like a very different person than you typically will see in the office, dressed up, in a white shirt and a button up. So yeah, quite a different background.
Just quick following up on that, you mentioned one reason that you wanted to join was you wanted to do something different. Was there any other compelling reason to do it?
At the time, well, there were so many factors, right? So I'd considered joining the military long before I even moved to the US, right? I've thought about it. It's like, there's a lot of discipline. You get to do things in structure. You put your, you put aside everything that people know about you, and you wear a very different personality, and you go and you do the mission for which you're assigned. And I really like that structure because be it in the military and the civilian world and in corporate America, when you're given a responsibility, right, you're accountable for that. And there's no other place, in my view, that teaches you accountability than the military.
Absolutely.
Right? There are no excuses for mistakes. And that was my number one attraction, right? It was like, I really wanted to learn about America, but I really wanted to learn it in a way that I could use it on the civilian side. Fast forward many years, I've learned a ton. You learn about good leadership, you learn about really bad leadership, right? Be it civilian or military. But I think some of these things, for people watching from outside, you have two distinct lives. For you, it's a blend of both, and you at some point you disconnect. On Monday morning, I'm a full civilian. All right, on a Friday when I'm drilling my unit, I'm a soldier. Right, it's such an absurd life to live, but you get into this routine of understanding structures and understanding how to actually segment different parts of your life, and knowing how to handle information that's very significant, and how you use that in basic conversations. Even in this conversation, how much do you say? How less do you say? Right. So I think that's, to me, it's really around the structure and accountability that comes with routine.
Awesome. Yeah. So part of what we brought Felix here to talk about today specifically was the journey from being an IC to where he is now, where he works with and he leads like executive functions, but also like talking about what are the things that prevent high potential people from making that transition. You were a high flyer somewhere, you started, or maybe when you left school, you were really, really good and you had a lot of confidence. And then you slowly found that as time has gone by, a lot of that stuff is going and you're no longer doing the things you thought you could do. So yeah, Felix, do you want to talk a bit about like when people say high flyer, what comes to mind?
I don't hear the word high fly often. I hear high performer.
High
right?
performer.
Let's think about it in that context. I think that in my view, there are many high performing individuals. Right. What I see is, what I mean by that is they have high context. Right. Put them in a room with a particular subject. They're the subject matter expert on it. What I find often is that there's a huge difference between people who have high context and people who can bring good clarity. And in the executive level, you need clarity, not context. Like there's an abundance of information. Good leaders need the ability to make good decisions. And they need that not from an abundance of information. They need you to bring them signals so they can make decision, right? And often for me, I think, a lot of high performers have a lot of depth and they keep chasing more depth. But at an executive level, depth isn't often what you're optimizing for, right? You want to be able to make good decisions very quickly, haven't considered the right set of things, and serve the priorities of the business in the long term. So I'll put it in that direction.
When you talk about that context that is needed at that executive level, right? From a high performer's perspective where we all think, you want to give as much information as possible, right? But I think what I'm hearing from you is you have to sieve the information and try to figure out what's relevant in that context or what's relevant to those people. But it can be hard to know except you're there, except you're sitting down there. How do you kind of know what is important to this person, right? Except you guess, right? I'm pretty sure in your role, when you're advising these executives, right, how do you pick and choose what to tell them versus what not to tell them when it looks like everything is important?
Yeah. So I think that's a good question. So let me introduce my role earlier in a different way, but I want to give you maybe a different way to think about it. If you imagine a whiteboard for a second, and all you had were scribbles of different priorities of different parts of the business and different teams and all the things they believe are good ideas. One of the most important parts of my role is to take a very simple cleaner, right? And clean up about 50% of what's on that whiteboard. And the second part of it is to circle the most important areas we need to spend our time on, right? And say to the executive right now, this is a pocket of information that is most critical for you to assess. And to do that, you have to be able to be a really good listener. Right? You need to go into rooms and spend time with people and listen. You're not there to be the smartest person. In this role, that no one hires a TA who is the smartest person in the company. Right? You need to be a good listener. You need to be able to filter out things that are important for the right audience. And you need to spend time and seek mentorship as well. Like there are leaders who are 10 times better than I am. Right? And you spend time with them and see the kind of things they care for, and you learn from them, and you learn. Like I can't say I've learned all it takes to be a TA, but I've learned that you need to lean on other people to sort of see the kind of information they use and sort of what information they use to make decisions. And that's what this role really brings. So I think to your initial question, to know what a leader needs, you need to have listened enough to the kind of things that get their attention, right? If I walked up to Jeff Bezos right now, I couldn't tell you what I would tell him is the most important thing. But if I walked up to the leader in Amazon today, I probably have enough context about the things they care for, right? So you need to spend enough time with them and understand that their priorities, because those things change very rapidly.
And TA is short for?
Technical advisor.
Technical advisor, okay.
Yeah. In other words, I think when Jeff Bezos created this role maybe 20 years ago, he also called it a shadow, which means you spend all your time with the executive in charge of that role, right? And you're paying attention because it's a very high context switching role, right? They switch from one function, one meeting to the other, and then I spend my morning maybe listening to discussions about Brazil and evening talking about Japan. Those are very different places, right? Different problems, or the EU, different compliance and regulatory decisions you need to make. But when you have a good sense of these things, you start to find patterns. And those patterns become, what you use to help the executive make better decisions, or help the organization function faster, or help ICs even in the team, right, be more successful in fewer meetings, because you don't want to end up in loops of meetings on end, right, trying to get to the outcome you want. So
that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. So I think we've spoken a lot about what you do. I think it's pretty clear that there is a big jump between being really good and then also like delivering on like very important things, right? So you've spoken about like being able to context switch, but also being able to constrain how much things you work on and being able to manage focus. What things generally do you think people ignore when they are thinking about the transition from high potential to actually like being a high performer?
Speed. If I could tell you anything, I would say speed. In Amazon, we say speed matters in business, right? And at executive levels, velocity of the decisions is very important. I sort of talked in depth earlier, right? People spend a lot of time seeking more information, and to be successful, be that IC, a manager, whatever function you have, you see what changes for a lot of people, and it's a very steep curve, right? You see someone goes from IC to a manager, it's a very challenging path. Managers to directors, or IC to a senior principal or equivalent of a director role, is also a much harder role. It's a much harder shift. But what I see that's very important, you have to understand what is the minimum information I need to make the decision as necessary. I don't want to be an expert in everything, right? That's the other part. I can't tell you all the regulations that exist in the world or around, outside of the US, for example. But there's a depth of information, maybe it's 10 or 20% that I need to make that decision. That is one of the most important things. Good executives make really good decisions and very high-stake decisions, right? They understand consequences and risk of not making decisions in time. And I think that's sort of the difference you see. And an evolving thing for me as well is like understanding being an IC, especially engineers, right? There's a tendency to want to be accurate. Like you want precision, right? As you start to evolve over time, you start to look for what, some people call directional accuracy. I want enough information to make the right decision. And that's, to me, light and day, even with my mentees, my mentors, sort of the big shift they often make is what is the minimum information I need to be successful and to make this decision, understanding the risk of inaction in part.
So is that speed more in terms of fail fast, fail early, or along the lines of, all right, we're a business and we have these goals or we have these competitors, and we know if we don't do this, if we don't make the decisions to go in this path, someone may beat us there, right? Is it a mixture of both, or is it more
I think it's a combination of, I don't know if it's one or the other. Speed matters in almost everything you do in business, right? So if I had an infinite amount of time, I could research and tell you about this microphone for the next 1 year. If you so give me 1 year, I'll learn everything about it, why they chose the materials, the cable, why it's in Bluetooth, why I could go down infinitely, right? Okay. In the other sense, if I need to make a decision, I might spend the most time. I know the decision I need to make is to figure out how to put this in the most portable format it is. I might spend my time in a time box area. Say, I have 1 week, I'm going to go as deep as I need to, and I'm going to seek an answer about X. And once I get to that point, I'm going to make the decision I need, right? So it's really speed in, getting the necessary information. You can apply in, competition, which is much of what you talked about. It can apply in your career. Like people spend a lot of time saying, I want to, gain more experience before I get to the other role that I want. And they're stuck in the role for about 4 to 5 years, and then 6 years and 10 years. You're in the same company, you're looking around and going, oh, I can no longer interview because I don't know what the market looks like, right? So it's really that speed of saying, what is the minimum I need to get to a place where I'm successful in applying for this role, interviewing that role, and actually landing that role. And that's what you seek, right? You don't go beyond that.
That's really good. And I think you started talking about this, but what are common things that you see with any high flyer? So you mentioned, for example, a bias against speed, but what are other things that you tend to see that people that stop people? So you mentioned speed, you mentioned a focus on accuracy and not understanding when to switch and understanding what is important in a context, in a scenario. What else do you think is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe one that just popped in my mind, an example of this is like good people think that good work gets them growth.
Oh.
Right? Really smart people assume that good work, and it's all, to me, that's table stakes. Your company hires you to do good work. You have to be good at your job. That's a table stakes, right? But it doesn't necessarily result in you growing.
Yeah.
That's one. So there's often that I'm going to keep doing the work, and I'm going to, I'm good at what I do. I have absolute confidence, right? I will tell people I'm an exceptional chef, okay? And I've been saying this for a long time. You don't see me on TV, being a chef. I have not optimized for, getting to the point where I have credibility to call myself a chef. But I believe that inward, right? So I cook every day and try to make my cooking better, but it really does. I haven't seen any growth of being a chef. I haven't personally, optimized for it. So does that same thing applies in corporate life where people tend to focus on, I want to do enough work and I believe that work is going to get me growth. It's just the basic. Okay. The second one of it is that people also believe that if they do enough of good work, there's someone somewhere who's just going to come and pull them up.
Yeah.
Misconception, right? It's your manager's job to help you grow, but your manager doesn't wake up every morning and think, how do I go pick this person and pull them up through the ladder of the whatever company you work at? So you have to be very intentional about that. Like you need to say, these are the things, like, you can take it in 2 ways. You can ask the hard conversations. So I'll have hard questions. What is necessary for you to see to get me the opportunities or to give me the level of work that would get me the opportunities I need? That's one. The second one is you can look around the priorities that your manager cares about, and you start to say, I think we're working on A, B, and C, but I really think no one is paying attention to D, and it's at some point that is going to be very critical, right? And I think to me that actually was the path that helped me a lot in Amazon. I joined Amazon about a year. I was promoted within about 1 year, which I'd heard at the times that people get it like after the third try and all that cool story, right? But you need to go and say, hey, look, I think we're paying attention to things that matter. But there's a paper cut that is more significant if we don't actually address it now. So I just don't think people, you don't get the fairy who just comes and pulls you up the ladder. That's
I have a follow-up question to that.
Yes.
Though. How do you find that balance, right? Because I can, in my head, I can be like, all right, hey, I think this thing is important, right? But you also have to convince whoever, right? It could be your manager, it could be directors, it could be people above to say, hey, someone, your technical advisor, someone up there has said we should go in this way as a company, right? But you being where you are and having a different perspective, it can be challenging or it can even feel intimidating to go and say, I think we should go this way, right? That's one end. And then the second end of it is now collaborating with them or working with them for them to trust and see that what you're saying actually makes sense, right? How do you go about navigating and balancing that?
So I'll say one thing first. Good ideas often have rigor, right? So I love to write, and I spend the time writing in and outside of Amazon. I joined Amazon without knowing that Amazon's culture was really about writing.
Yeah.
And I've been writing long before I came to Amazon,
Yeah.
right? So I was like, okay, I'm in this company, they write a lot. I love writing. This is perfect, right? So a few days ago, I was in a meeting. We're talking about some very deeply technical topic. I had joined this meeting without the executive I support. And halfway through the meeting, I was like, oh, I need to get out of this meeting now because there's an idea stuck in my head. I need to go write it down. I left the meeting, walked away, took my note, wrote it down, came back in. After the meeting was over, I went outside in the sunlight, weather was good, and I just kept ideating on it. I was like, this literally is an intellectual property material that I need to go and go deeper in, right? And I spent yesterday writing in between every second I had, and I was developing that idea. And the more I went into it, it's like, no, this doesn't make sense here. Maybe it makes sense this other way. And the more you get that rigor of challenging your own thought, I get that clarity through writing. Okay, and I highly recommend it for everybody. Writing is a basic mechanism you can use for anything, especially important for your growth. Things that don't happen via email or in written format often never happen. Conversations don't exist. There's no way to maybe someone records them in this session, but in the workplace, you need to keep a trail of the things you do. And I've seen you guys talk about this in writing down. At the end of the week, the things you've done and so on, like what value you bring, you can do in those formats. For me, it's really writing. You need to bring the rigor first, right? To say, I've really evaluated these things and then present it and say, look, so someone sees it, they go, okay, this is the value you want to bring. Let's see if this person has really thought it through or they're just looking for the easy pass. Because for an executive, they don't want to make a decision that is so rushed. Like if you tell me invest $1 million, I get $20 million of it, sounds good, right? But I'm sure there's so much more you haven't told me and I want to see that you've gone through that depth. Right, so that's one.
So you have to do your own due diligence in the form of gathering that information and then writing it in a way that's digestible.
Yeah. So it's one rule I have. Before I send an email to the executive that I support, the first thing I say to myself is, if I was to make a decision with the information I'm sending, is it enough? It doesn't have to be complete. It has to be enough. Right? Complete means I don't have to give you all the technical decisions and all the things that go in the 6-page, 10-page document. I can give you a 1-paragraph summary, but it has to be enough for them to make the decision they need. That's a bar I think people should have in the assessment. Anytime you want to send information, is it in a portable enough format that if someone conveys it, the message stays true? That's my recommendation.
Okay.
I think the other thing though is you mentioned you took ideas that you had and then you communicated that and you put in all the rigor. How do you make sure you capture the value of doing all that work?
The value of the research or the value or in what sense?
How do you capture the reputational value is one of the first things I'm saying.
Make sure I understand this question. So you spend the time, you come up with an idea, you spend the time to develop the depth of the idea.
Yes.
How do you capture that there is value in what you do?
How do you capture the value personally in your career?
Got it. Oof. That's a good question. I'll frame it differently. How do you reap the value of the things you do?
Yeah,
right?
Essentially, yeah.
Got it. I'll say this in 2 parts. One, if you're doing immediate work, and you assume or you expect you simply get value from that individual work, you're probably optimizing for the short term, right? The result you want in your career is not the short term growth. It's the long, like where do I want to be in the long term? And long term to you is different. For me, it's 5 years. For another person, might be 10 years, right? You optimize for what's necessary for your growth. So very important, you must communicate. I do this as a personal hobby. I spend everybody who sees people run into me on the weekends on a cafe. I spend my Sundays at a cafe typically, right? And I'm planning ahead of my week. What must be true next week for me to feel like I've added value that week? And I write that down. For some people, it's a postmortem. And you need to say, I spent all this time doing this. Have I delivered any value, right, by doing any of this? And can I communicate that value up that if the CEO heard about this stuff in 5 minutes, they understand and they agree that it's important?
Okay.
And you need to build that out. I would tell people who want to go to promotions, write what's called the body of work review and pull all of those things in and get people to read it, see they have conviction and say, this person has really moved the needle in the direction the business wants. It might work in that.
Can you expand on that first part? Because it's one that I've never heard before, but I think it's very, very important because you had said you don't want to optimize for the immediate this thing, right? So I'm a software engineer too, for example, right? Yes, my ideal goal is to get to senior or get to this thing, but are you saying like, well, or maybe I'm an entry-level software engineer, right? My goal is to get to, like every entry-level software engineer just to get to that next level. But you're saying instead of optimizing for that next level, optimize for even more?
Not every growth in the short term is good for you. I had a conversation with a mentee, actually, even more, very recently with all the TAs. There's so many, a handful of TAs, maybe 20, 27 of them across Amazon, right? Amazon is almost 1.5 million people and a handful of TAs who support the organization. I was having a conversation and I told them about this career decision I'd made. I started off my career as a software engineer. I got to a point where I was managing software engineers and product managers. And I'd transitioned at that point to PM, and my official title at the time was PM, right? It had PM in it. And there was an opportunity that came and someone said, hey, come take this software engineering title. It was good in the short term. It brings you more capital, brings you more cash, right? I can take more, a few $100,000 more. I'll be happy about it. But in the long term, I personally believe I am more successful in the PM function than I am in the software engineering function for the things that matter to me, right? So that decision is in many ways what got me into the rooms that gave me the opportunity to become a TA. Right? Had I chosen to become a software engineer and manager, not saying anything is wrong with that, it's a beautiful path, right? Comes with its incentives, but you have to know what's good for you in the long term, and you don't take the opportunities that end up giving you short-term benefits, but provide more challenges for you to go through to get to where you want to get to later. For example, someone says, "I'm a business intelligence engineer. I want to be a scientist tomorrow." And someone says, "Okay, if you really want to be a scientist, I want to see you spend the next 7 months of your career doing some randomization that maybe could give them conviction for you to become a data engineering manager. Hopefully, if they're still there in the company. So you spend all your time and you burn through it, right? The alternative you could do is, I want to optimize for hard learning for the next 3 to 6 months on what it takes to be a data engineer or data scientist or whatever the function is. And you focus in those areas and you go and actually shoot the hardest shot to take that job, right? There's no law. It's like if you're good at it, potentially you get it. The other hopes that the person is still there and they give you that job, right? The other so many other factors. You could just be bad at it, right? So, but you learn if you're bad at it by focusing on giving yourself very time constraint. As I talk about, speed matters a lot. You need to spend the time and do it and get that validation. So I think it's a blend of a couple of things. There's never one single right answer in most scenarios in life, right? Just as much as this is. But at least this is how I would think about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the other thing when you spoke about writing was you try to communicate what is important to the executive. How do you glean what is important? I know like some places you can like align with an OKR. OKR is objective and key results. But how do you try to be sure you're aligning with what really matters? Because you could, and I think this is especially important for like ICs when you're trying to say, hey, like we should spend some time working on this idea, but you also don't know what your leaders really care about. So what structures do you generally find people can use to align?
Good question. If you're very early in your career, the chances that the advice I'm going to give working for you is very little. Okay. Everybody has to pay some price and you have to get your hands dirty. You need to become very confident in the work you do. Often when you do that, you are so distance or far away from the levels of information the organization runs on. And you're going to have to pay that price. The closer you get to the middle of your career, you have to seek more information. Like seeking more information is, hey, if you cannot make a decision understanding the priorities of the business, you're far away, right? And what would happen is you tend to hear things in town hall meetings. You see things in public announcements. So you need to find the avenues that allow you to get closer, right? I would say for companies who have chief of staff or TA like Amazon does and all the, like it's okay to make friends with these people and say, hey, I know I may not be able to change anything in your day, but I would love to hear about 2 or 3 of the trends that keep showing up in this director and his VP's world. Just having that information is enough for you tomorrow to go to them and say, hey, look, I have this idea. I also know that this might be important to you, and I want to spend 5 minutes of your time. Because if you mention something they care about, they're going to give you more time. They're likely to give you time, okay? So that's my thing. Information is very important, and you need to get yourself close enough to the people who can make the decisions before it's announced in the town hall. I want to slightly go back for a second. You asked me the questions you asked me earlier, right? I mentioned sort of 2 topics. I think there's a third one that I want to bring up because I think it is so important for immigrants. There's a tendency for, myself, especially when I was, thinking I'm an so I went from being an F1 to overnight becoming a US citizen, kind of an oddball, right? So I showed up for my EB, I think it was EB2 at the time, interview, and the guy goes, hey, your US citizen application had already been approved, and I shouldn't go forward in this. I'm like, I did not know that. He's like, yep, come back 2 weeks and go do it. That's how it happened. Lots of in-between stories there, but I kind of went through this fast-forward process. But when you see in the tech spaces, there are lots of immigrants in the US who work and drive a lot of the growth of US businesses. What that means often is that because you have this concern of immigration, you want to be the quiet voice in the room, even when you know that incorrect or incomplete decisions are being made, you stay quiet.
Yeah.
Safety is not your friend when it comes to growth. You have to get to a point, again, all things considered, be smart about your decisions. You have to find the voice to say, I think we need to think a bit more. Like, if we think about this now, I think we're optimizing for X, and X is really good. But can we please spend a few minutes to talk about why? Right? You need to do that. Like in Amazon, the leadership principle is disagree and commit, but you need to first disagree before you commit, right? The absence of disagreement is not what you're looking for. Good leaders have opinions, right? And they have the ability to actually evolve their opinions. You could express it and be incorrect, and that's okay. You evolve your views. My views have changed on a lot of things, but you need to have the awareness that safety is not a good enabler of success. I think Ginny Rometty at some point said comfort and growth do not coexist, right? You can't grow while seeking the comfort of, I don't want to be on anyone's radar for challenging a concept. You have to get to that place where I think we're not thinking enough about this, or I think we're going to make a decision that would have to be, it'll be really significant to correct. So, and then you share your opinion. Sometimes you don't have to say it open. I listen, I go 80%, I would say maybe 80-90% of the meetings I attend, I don't speak. Right? It's the tendency for some people who want to just speak in the room. I stay quiet most of it, and I'm typing away in my notes. But when it comes to making the decisions, I send that information to be able to help the organization make the right decisions. So you can pick the format that works for you. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room, but ensure that you're constantly providing the value for which the company has already hired you to do. So you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't do so. So I wanted to bring that up. You have to get to the point where you disagree.
And something you just mentioned is disagree and commit is very important. It's something I practice. But this is weird again. How do you capture value when you disagreed, committed to something, it was a wrong decision, and you were right? And then you're like, hey, I called out all these problems. How do you capture the value of that as well? Because I think sometimes you will disagree and you will have to commit because we have to do this thing at this time. Yep. But you could see all the problems and you documented them, but for some reason, they still made the wrong decision.
So one thing I've learned is people often make decisions because they don't know, not because they want to make the wrong decision, right? If all things being true, people would tend to make the right decision, right? They would want to optimize for the right decision in the long term. So first, personal level between you and the people who make the decision, you have to have that awareness that they often have made an incomplete decision or based on assumptions that they found out wasn't true. Okay. Now, what do you do with that ultimately? It's like you come back and, to me, what I see is it's actually a huge trust enabler, right? If you have intuition and intuitions are right, and the organization goes in the opposite direction, and tomorrow someone says, or you realize, you don't want to be the one in the room saying, "Hey, I told you so," right? I told you so is going to get you nowhere, right? But when next you pitch something, people realize that this person brought a point of view that was very important. Had we acted on that point of view, we could have gotten a better outcome. So it actually gives you huge credibility, and you need to use that credibility in the future. You don't have to say it now and say, "Oh, I told you," right? But use it for the future and say, these are opportunities where I think we thought about this. Like I saw a document recently where someone says, we're making these decisions around X, but we'd made this same decision about something else a few years ago. And we saw how it played out. We want to learn from how that played out and do something different, right? Who was in charge of driving that decision doesn't matter. Who made the right decision, made the wrong decision, the company moves on. Every single one of us return the titles that the companies give to us at some point. But you need to leverage it while you're there and say, I have this ability because I spend a lot of time reading X, Y, and Z. I have a perspective I think could be beneficial. We've seen it before in the previous trend. One actually applied here. So I just say, just don't be the loud voice going, "I told you so." I told you so, never good in a private life, doesn't work in corporate America. But think about how you can sort of, bring that same level of trust that people get from observing you.
I'm gonna say I think what I'm capturing is that it's more about how you phrase it, right? Like going in and saying, "Hey, let's think about it this way because this is how we've thought about this in the past, and this is the outcome that we've gotten from that, right? We have an opportunity to think about it this way, as opposed to say, "Hey, I told you guys to do this thing last year. You guys didn't listen, right?" Yeah.
Also, right, even let's take this scenario of, let's say you told them something and that, turned out to be correct, but they did the opposite part. Okay? It's also very important to know that what's true today can be false tomorrow.
Yeah.
The world changes so fast around you that even something that you said before that was wrong could become true. It could be exactly what the business needs to rely on, right? We've seen many businesses that came up so early, bad timing, wasn't successful. A few years later, someone else did it and did incredibly well and was successful, right? So it's even in instances where you were not correct, it's okay to still lean and say, hey, look, we tried this here. What we didn't pay attention to at the time was that these other external factors didn't exist. Today they exist. And we need to lean in a bit more in this thing. So you can apply it in two ways. You were right, you were incorrect, and you can still sort of get that value. Ultimate thing is you need to build trust with people for who you provide advice to, and how you do it, how you communicate it, like you say, is probably one of the most important parts.
A supporting question to that is, how do you also improve the visibility or legibility of your clear thinking?
I have this thing in my office. I have this little thing I write. Right, you need to just my personal things that your work needs to be legible. Right, people talk about visibility and go into the room and be a very, very loud voice. Legibility for me, how I think about this, very important that people understand. It's really around clarity. People need to understand what you say. Right, you can scream it on the top of the house. You can write in a very silent room. But people must understand the impact or the so what of what you do, right? It's a huge tendency where someone says, I worked on this machine learning model that does X, Y, Z, and and they go on this rampage and they're the smartest person in the room, right? But they've not communicated anything whatsoever that is important enough for their work to matter. Like if your manager heard about all the work you did and read all the 10 documents you've written and all the code, and they go into the room and they cannot explain the work you've done, I consider that legible. There's probably a better term for it, right? Your work is not legible enough for people to communicate, understand, and actually drive value from. So I just keep that as my personal mantra. Is if I can remind myself of anything, you need to make sure that the work you do is legible.
Yeah, the way I frame it, the way I personally structure this now, and I'm not sure it's the most effective yet, is when I work on something, my one-on-ones, I talk to my manager through that. And then subsequent one-on-ones, I help him build a narrative of how all these things sit together. But there is legibility to your manager, but there is also like, how much can your manager do? Like, how do you also balance that out with like the hierarchy or the structure of your organization?
Everybody in the world wants a good manager.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody wants a good manager. And I say this to my team, is like, my biggest fear in the world of being a manager is that I do not want ever anyone who I manage to go write the Medium article and say how their manager sucked. Right? And I mean this because it's every manager's fear. For you to have a good manager, you need to understand, in part, think about what do managers think about. Every manager would rather have a very successful team and tell all the great stories of how they made their team successful.
Yeah.
Right? No manager says, I want to tell the war stories of how I made sure my team failed.
Yeah.
Right? So the things you want must be, or your incentives, the things that you care about must be very much aligned with some of the things the managers care for. So let's take the example of your question. If you don't have enough information about things that come upwards of your manager, like things that come from your manager's manager or the organization, then you really can't help your manager. So it's in their best interest to give you the necessary information for you to help them do their job. Okay. Right? So you need to tell that to your manager. Like, I want to, I'm glad working this task and doing all these things you asked me to do, and I think they're the right things to do. I trust your judgment. But I want to be able to understand beyond what you're asking me to do and tell me about other things that you hear in the forum, so I can actually, of course, with right judgment, you don't want to share a lot of information. Right judgment, I can actually help you identify other things that might happen. Right? I'm down in the details. You have more information than I do. If I can combine a bit of what you have and some of the details I see, we can probably move faster than we can. So the things you care for need to be aligned with what your manager cares for. They want to be successful in front of their manager. They have a manager as well. Everybody has a manager. The CEO has a manager, right? So everybody has a manager. It's shareholders or whoever the board, everyone has a manager. And your behaviors and the things you care for need to be aligned. So communicate. Now I gotta say, communication is one important part. Helping your manager realize that more information around what's happening outside of your day-to-day job is actually beneficial for them, because you will spot patterns that you can use to help them. So that's my thought.
Also, I think something else I've always thought about is at work, I work with a lot of PMs for sister teams and supporting teams. And I talk to them about what they're doing, what they're thinking, what's on their roadmap. And sometimes, because your manager still has a filter in his head about things he gets to you, yep, versus you can go directly to the source and understand from the source. And then you can have like more in-depth conversations where sometimes you're like, hey, but you can have information that your manager doesn't have or didn't think to share with you, or he didn't just capture in detail because he got 200 things at the same time and he only captured the first 10.
Yep. So true. One thing I'm somewhat notorious for doing is I spend a lot of time in elevators talking to people. It doesn't matter what Amazon building I go to. I'm going to have a conversation with somebody in the elevator. It's a great, like I'm an introvert naturally, but in the office, I'm very extroverted, right? I show up in the office and I see someone in the elevator and I'm going to ask them the question, I might give a compliment. Oh, nice bag, right? And I generally mean it. If I told you nice bag, you watch this video, I told you that I meant it. But nice bag, and someone will tell you, people have a tendency to talk about the things they like, right? If you interview a candidate, you tell them, tell me about the product you like a lot, they will tell you about something. It's like, oh, tell me a little bit about what went wrong in your day yesterday. Someone's going to tell you about something. So if you meet people where they are without them feeling like, you want something from them, you just want to know who they are. My old role helped a lot. I went down to New York for one day, met someone in the elevator, turned out to be one of the people who leads our, video business, right? And in the conversation, I was like, hey, I lead the team that is responsible for X, Y, Z in search, and it could be beneficial for Y. You can show that customers the right things at this point, and it became a whole thing, right? And that evolved into a series of work between their team and my team. It's something that never happened before. So using those moments, 100% agree with you. You have to get away from your little bubble, because the bubble you have is, every bubble you are in is sort of a limitation of information. Go talk to what other teams are doing and see it's the team's so far away. I have a tendency to talk to teams that are so far away, right? And I've had opportunities come from meeting people in the elevator. Met someone in the elevator once and some building in SLU. Few months later, they said, hey, we're looking for a product leader for our organization. Would you be interested in? At the time I wasn't. I said no, but it came, right? Yeah. So you really never know. But you meet someone, they come and get your opinions. You absolutely have to do it. I couldn't encourage that more. I use elevators. Everybody can find their own spots and what they do. When I go study in cafes, I always see smart people. I joined the military. One of the things I didn't mention, I was writing. Actually, so funny. I was writing a document when some people met me and it's like, oh, what are you writing about? And asked me questions that turned out to be recruiters for this program. And that program sort of brought me into the military. It became my path to becoming a U.S. citizen and so many other factors later. But it was while I was writing about something had nothing to do with my degree, something I just cared about. So, but you need to be in spaces where people can discover the things you care for, right? Passion is a very good thing. When you have good passion, that's great, right? People can see that consistently and see you have curiosity, you can work well with people. There's a higher tendency. Right? You want to do things that increase the chances of success when the opportunity lands. And so that's, I couldn't agree more with that point.
Okay, so summary of the point is go work for a place where you get to go to the office every day and kind of have serendipity.
I didn't say, well, you have to go to the office every day. All I'm saying is you have to have a good sense that there's so much information out there. You're not going to get it by simply being in your own space.
By staying in your bubble.
You have to seek it some way, be it online forums, whatever. You got to find your mechanism. For me, if I'm ever in a building, it's an elevator. I would find a way to talk to people. And it's so short that people are going to tell you the things that they want you to know about them, right?
Just knowing you and knowing a little bit about your background, you've gone from being an individual contributor, an IC, to...
And I loved it.
To being a manager, so managing a group of product managers and software engineers, to then being a director, right, where you are now managing managers, and then to where you are now. Maybe there's one step in between, I don't know, but essentially you've kind of like gone through that hierarchy, right, within the org chart and the org chain, and where I'm curious to know how you kind of like thought about things at different levels, right? So when you're an IC, you're typically thinking about things on just that low level, but what changes when you then go from an IC to a manager, right?
Can I pause you?
Yeah.
I want you to start this exact question from where you just started.
Okay.
What changes when a person, started like that?
All right. So what changes when you go from an IC to a manager, and then from a manager to a director, and then from a director to even, now being a technical advisor to like executives, right? What changes as you go up that org chart ladder? Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So first of all, I think I did some of my best work as an IC, some of my best individual work as an IC. And if I think there's a term people call operator, right? The operator, you get to do things, you know how to run the business, and you know all these facets of what's important. I think they're really good ICs who operate in that sense, and I enjoyed doing that. But what changes a lot, I think, your priorities change over your career, right? And I wrote this article that talks about, like, don't chase your passion. And, I don't know, I think you'd seen this article, right? And that's because it evolves. Like, what you care for changes. And we can talk about this in a bit. But for me, being an IC, what I found was, and I still believe this very strongly, if you put me in a room of PMs, I could run circles around them because you've done it over time, right? Repetition increases speed, and which you can do the same thing over time. And I wanted to learn something that I felt that there was still a huge gap for me to do. Like, how can I get people to do what I do 10x better than I can? And how can I learn from them to be more effective in what I do? Okay. So one of the easiest paths to do that was, you could grow a bit more and then you influence people. But the more you grow in this lateral way in an IC world, you don't really get to touch everything. You don't become a technical expert in everything. You either have breadth first view where you know a lot of things, but not too much about every single thing, or depth first, become a specialist in one particular area. I wanted to be a manager so I could actually have people and help, learn from people who had both the depth and those who focus on breadth. Right. So it was aligned with what I want in the long term. I want to be able to see how I can help people do that, but also be able to learn from people. There's so many people 10x smarter, if not more, than I am. Right. So when the opportunity came, it wasn't intentional. So let's just start here. I never said I want to be a manager. And this is almost true for a lot of people. You're going to get to the point where someone realizes that you're really good at your job, and they believe that the next path for you is to help others become better at their job and help them grow. And that was it for me. Right. In fact, one of the last roles I had before becoming a TA, I heard about that I was getting the role 15 minutes before it was announced. Right? I was called into a room and said, it was HR and my boss at the time, and they said, hey, look, we have 2 announcements. Your boss got another role to go do really cool, fantastic things, and his entire function is moving to you. Right? And I go, wait, where are you going? Why are you leaving? Right? I didn't even hear that I'd gotten the role. I was like, why are you going? Where are you leaving? We were just chatting yesterday about XYZ things. But I said to, at that point, it just hit me. It's like, I'd started to notice that this person had been stepping back and allowing me to operate in their role for some time, right? And, I always say every good manager thinks about how you create vacuum for someone else to fill. One of the most important things you can do. So to answer your question, going from an IC to become a manager, you think beyond yourself, right? You, of course, have a business objective you need to hit, but how can you enable people? Well, 1, how do you create vacuum for people to grow in and be able to fill and solve problems? 2, how do you ensure that they're happy about the job they do, right? The last thing you ever want is for someone to say, I really like this job. My wife hates that I work for you, right? And I've heard this a lot. I've seen instances of people wanting to leave roles and they come and say, hey, look, I talked to my wife that you're going to become my new manager, and they really want me to work for you, right? It's happened in my career. One of the best compliments a manager can get is when a family member who doesn't actually work in the company has heard enough about how you work with someone that they trust you enough to say, hey, I do think you should work with this person or for this person. So you have to start to think about things in order of magnitudes beyond yourself. That's one of the most important changes that happened for me. And then, of course, thinking about how you create vacuum, and when it's time, we're not learning anymore, right? When you don't learn anymore, you need to find other ways to learn. It mustn't always be an upward promotion, right? The skills required to be a manager are extremely difficult. People want you to be their boss, and they want you to be their therapist, and they want you to be their friend, and they want you to be the expert at everything. They want you to have all the answers. And most times you really don't have all the answers. You're relying on them to make decisions. So that's one of the things I see changes. Like, I used to think about, I want to be the smartest when I was an IC. I want to always have the right answers. I want to be able to go into a conversation for 30 minutes or 10 hours and tell you all about what I do. And I optimize for that. And at some point it gets routine, right? And you can switch roles and still do it all over again. And if I'd done it, I've worked in cloud as a software engineer, I switched to PM, do marketplace, and then you do something else, and it's just routine. The process, the underlying mental model and frameworks in which you operate become very familiar to you. But when you go from manager to director, it is not an upward trend. It's not just, I learn to make decisions better and so on. No, I think it's almost an extreme pivot, right? And I think people fail at this because they assume they need to be depth first to be able to still make the same decision and set all the right, say you work on this and you help work on this. So you think about this problem. As a director, it's very different. People are relying on you to make decisions that are 2 or 3 years into the future. I need to guide your team to get there. and make sure that the people above you, right, that people, your managers and their managers understand that you're setting the direction that sets the company up for success. As a manager, you have one objective: have your team deliver what it needs to do. As a director, you're setting strategy for a business that often has 10,000 other strategies. I hate to use a pyramid example. Everybody has their little pyramid of things they care for, right? And then the pyramid gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger in opposite direction, right? Sort of an inverted pyramid, I guess, in this case. And you need to understand as a director, you need to work a lot with people you have no, like, of course, as a IC, you have people you have no control over, you need to influence. But it becomes very important as a director because there's so many other directors, right? And so many VPs, and you need to think about that because if you don't get that right, you're going to be so bad at your job. It's going to be obvious to everybody. And it's often very obvious who's a bad director.
Yeah.
Often very visible, right? And so I think, again, most important things, correctly, moving from IC to a manager, you stop to think about the things you optimize for yourself and how do you create vacuum for other people to grow. That stays true as a director, but you also have to think about how you influence people who you have absolutely no power over. And that's at least, in my world today as a TA, it's true. I can't hire or fire people per se, but I can influence all the hiring and the firing decisions, right? And of course, the consequences of decisions or the input I give becomes very, very important because it impacts thousands of people, not only a single individual you manage.
Okay, I think something you mentioned that's really interesting is how do you influence people you have no control over? What structures do you have? Because this is something that I sometimes do. I have a few tricks. For example, when I want someone to do something, I think we both agree we need to do something. I ask them to commit to a timeline, right? And then we're like, okay, so now we both have a timeline that you wrote and that is now set in stone. But what other structures do you think exist, or what other structures do you think you can use to influence people when you actually don't have direct control over them?
So maybe let's think about what, when people are unable to influence people, what's the driving reason? It's often the people's goals are misaligned.
Okay.
Right? I might have my objective. My objective is aligned to something that my director or my boss or whatever has said this is important for us. And the other person has theirs, right? And if you understand that those two things are often misaligned, the first thing you should do is to find the way to align those goals in some format. Very important you do that because the second you do that, you guys are speaking the same language. I'll give you a very practical example. For about 3 years of my job, there was a problem I thought was so important that I kept going to one organization and saying, hey, we need to solve this now. We need to solve this now. And everyone says, yes, we agree we need to solve this now. Like, okay, we need one headcount. We need to hire one person to pay attention and build this stuff. And they're like, yeah, we agree with you, but we don't want to invest one. I'm like, we're talking about one headcount, right, for 3 years? And at some point, I realized, hold on, this is actually not, it's no longer important to talk to them about one headcount. It's important to tell them the risk of their inaction. And I spent about 2 months with the new director was in that role and said, look, because we haven't done this, here's what has happened quarter over quarter over quarter. And we need to do this now, or go back to the leaders of the business and say, we have intentionally chosen to leave this running for 3 years. And guess what they did? This was one of the last things I did in my old role. I didn't get one headcount. I got more than I asked for, right? And they said, if you need more to get this done, we need to do it now. I will provide it to you. But the first thing to do was understanding why they weren't doing it in the first place, right? And aligning those two things together. At my old role was helping Amazon understand what customers wanted in like sub 5 minutes. Anywhere you were in the world, we could tell what your interests were, and we use that to make inventory decisions, moving things around the country. So for me, that was very important to people. You need to know what customers want. You can't make decisions in the blind and hope, how do you say, spray and pray, right? You make a bunch of decisions and hope that one lands. So you have, I think the key thing that I see is very different. People don't realize that the goal of an organization, one team, is often very distinct from the other. You need to find ways to speak in their language to get what you want, right? And sometimes you're not going to get it. That's okay. Right? You might have all the smart words, but it just doesn't work. Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So essentially, what you're saying is, you want to essentially get context about what really matters to the org, and reframe your problem in a way that benefits them, or you want to call out, hey, what are the risks and what are the consequences of your inaction, and then make it obvious to them, like, hey, we've incurred this cost because you did not make this decision. Or is that deliberate and have a conversation from that perspective versus a perspective where you are asking for permission? You're instead saying, hey, like, this is some context, providing context of the implications, and then giving them that.
Yeah, and building on the way you frame this now, there's another part. When you ask for things, you try to influence people. You must be willing to give something, right? In my military job, this let's say intelligence officers, I work with diplomats, and I often would say, yeah, it's actually one of the most important parts of your job is diplomacy, right? You can order a soldier to stand, and they will stand, or you can help them understand why they need to stand. And at all points when you actually just walk in, they would stand because of you, right? They still respect you in both instances. They are, you have you're a superior soldier than they are, you're a more senior soldier, whatever, they will respect you. But you want the instances where you don't have to order people to do things. And that often comes from showing respect to them. And they often will give respect back to you. The same thing applies in a job place. It's like, hey, I'm going to invest with you. I'm going to put one person from my team to work on this stuff. And I need you to put the same to help me get there. We're going to do it together, right? And we can get there faster. And then we can use that resources for other things. Often gets you there. You can't just make demands of people and assume that they operate in a world where they have an abundance and they don't want to do what you want. People always want good feedback. They would do everything in the world if they had the ability to. So you need to sort of operate in like, what can I provide to give myself and this person conviction that I'm in this problem with them.
I have a follow-up question, which is a little bit tangential to what you were talking about with managing people, right?
Yep.
You had mentioned creating a vacuum for people to grow into roles so that they're also learning, right? Which is something that individual contributors love, right? But at the same time, how did you deal with the different personalities and the different goals and the different working styles and the different, when you become a people manager, right? Like you said, it's not just the work that needs to get done anymore. It's now the people, right? It's now enabling the people.
Yep.
And there's a whole organization called HR, which is just responsible for people, right? But in your role as a manager, you're kind of like doing not just, like I said, the business part, but also managing the people and their, like the interpersonal relationships, how do you motivate people? Like, how did you go about thinking about that? Yeah.
And I think I have a supporting question to that, because this is something that you hear from immigrants. You're like, yeah, in Nigeria, if somebody wasn't performing, you just call them into a room and you just tell them, hey, this is tough. And you just change it for them, like we say it. And you probably see change, or like it's very obvious. But in the US, it's a completely different dynamic as well. So when I talk to some people and they're talking about, hey, I think about becoming a manager, they're also saying, I have to deal with people from a different culture that, not from one culture, right? From a variety of cultures that have a different perspective to stuff. And also like with some younger people as well, they're talking about like mental health and stuff. And like it's a lot of other things that you're like, hey, I just want to do good work. But like, to Uma's question, how do you?
Yeah. So I don't think I have any right answer on this, but I would share my point of view. I don't know if it's the right answer, so it might work in some context. Okay. The first thing every manager should know and understand is everybody assumes you know better than they do. Or they assume, everybody who reports into you assumes you're going to make the right decision for them. I would always optimize for the better manager. I want a good manager. And it comes with a huge responsibility of saying, I need to go out of my way to understand what performance means for everybody, right? I have had people on my team who are exceptional. And at some point, things change. Personal life, people say, oh, keep your personal life and work-life balance and all those things. I don't know if truly there's a concept of work-life balance. There's a concept of discipline, right? But something always gives. Everything cannot be priority. At some point, something gives. And you see that things that happen in their life affect them in their workplace. And things happen in their workplace affect their personal life. And you need to understand that before you make decisions. Your job is not to hire and only fire, right? It's to hire and develop. And to develop a high-performing person, you need to understand who they are, the things that excite them, the things that bore them, the things they hate. And you must be comfortable giving feedback as much as you must be comfortable taking feedback, right? You go into rooms and have people I've been in rooms where an employee says, oh, look, Felix, you're really good at this, and I really respect you a lot, but I hate this thing you do, right? And you have to be comfortable taking that. I'm like, okay, here's why I do it. It's like, yeah, sounds good. It should have been good if you told me why first. Because I would always do it when you ask, I trust you, right? And you need to get to the point where you say, okay, now I know what this person wants. They want enough clarity. And people will always trust you when you're transparent, right? People trust very transparent managers. And one of the most important things for me, and I say this with every leader I've worked for, is I love brutal, candor. Be very plain and say, hey, look, dude, I did not like the way you did this. I'm going to say, cool, I agree with you, or I don't agree with you, but no problem, right? It's like the military does this feedback thing sometimes, and someone wrote in the military school, the officer school, and someone wrote, at the time, I thought I was a pro athlete in terms of running, right? I was such a slow runner. I was running like 12, 13-minute miles, and I'd gone down to six-minute mile at the point, and someone had to write feedback for me. And they wrote, Felix can be better at running. Okay? Right? And I thought, oh my God, I just cut my running time in half in a period of about 2 months. And there's probably one person faster than I was. And I was, faster than the military standard. And someone wrote, you have to be, Felix could do better at running. And I just thought this through, and you go, okay, but what do they mean, right? I can get offended at it and go, yeah, who cares? Discard feedback as you want, right? But what I came to learn was he wasn't talking about the speed at which I ran, right? But really how the physique when I run like a duck. So the form, right? Yeah. So it's the form. But I like, oh, hold on. If I learned, and I didn't know what good form was, I just wanted to run and pass the finish line. But I actually spent time with this person who was slower than I was. But I learned that because of the way I run, I actually always had shin splints. I actually had no clue, right? In the same, I give this context to say you might think you're the best at what you do, you might be the best at what you do, but you must be willing to give and take feedback, right? And it's one important thing every manager does. So many managers just there to tell you you're good or you're bad and so on. And there's another part. I talk about good feedback for a second. There's something one of my military officers had said. He says, it's very easy to give a kick to the ass than to give a pat on the back. So you must be comfortable giving more pats on the back than the other one I said earlier. You can whatever you call it. Yeah. Okay, good. But that's a reminder in my head. I always remember that. It's like if you tell someone what they did today wasn't good, you should also be comfortable and willing to tell them that what they did was really good. That's important. I don't know if I sort of drifted away from your question, but kind of wanted to.
No, I think you're definitely answering it where it's like, at the end of the day, there are people, right? There are people and
humans.
They're humans, right? And you have to understand what makes them uniquely human.
Yes. And
adapt your approach personally to each one of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're not there to be their friends. This is a misconception. Like I said, everyone wants to be a therapist and their friend and their manager and their colleague and their, whatever, one-on-one buddy, whatever they want, right? But you're really not there to be their friend. You're ultimately managing people against an objective the company has given to you. And you need to get there somehow. But it's an easier road to get to that objective if you really know these people and all the things that affect their decisions and how they get excited about work and the kind of work they hate. I hate routine work, right? If I do the same thing every day, I always had to think about how to automate myself out of that job. And that's, in many ways how I've picked the next job I've done. So you need to find those kind of things and help people and put them in the right problems that they care about. You need to have a good listening ear, period. Manager, IC, whoever it is. You must listen more than you talk because it helps you.
Yeah. Supporting question here is, you mentioned the ability to get feedback.
Yep.
But the thing is, a lot of people I know, including me, you mostly get feedback during feedback cycle. There was a time I tried to get feedback like a bit more frequently, but it's hard to build that habit. So what generally structures do you find for people to get feedback before things have blown up, right? Like what structures have you found in that work?
Yeah. I don't want to talk a lot about Amazon, but I'll tell you something Amazon did this, I think last year, that I found really good. Typically, you get feedback during the feedback cycle, right? The performance cycles. Last year, I believe, Amazon made it in such a way where you could get feedback, formal feedback from anybody, anytime. And that's the same tool, send it to anyone, anytime, and capture the feedback. Because people come and go, right? People stay in a company and they move out of the company for whatever reason, and you've lost that feedback, right? But they, in that context, they've created this opportunity for you to do it. But feedback often doesn't have to be that formal. Feedback can simply be, look, I speak very fast and probably still do now. But many years ago, I spoke extremely fast. I decided, I know salespeople are probably good at talking, I need to find someone who's a good salesperson and spend time with them and really understand how they control the pace at which they talk and make sure they're getting the right information. So I got someone, call a mentor or whatever you want to call it, or a coach. And I was spending time just listening in on how they actually talk when they do sales calls, right? And he would say, okay, and I'll talk, and they'll go, oh, Felix, you need to slow down when you say X words, right? And you slow down when you say this. You can be fast here, but nobody really cares. That's the detail that they'll read about in paper. Focus on these areas. And you need to seek, so you seek it in every aspect of your life, right? You speak, your personal life, you listen to people who are married, and you listen to people who are not married and have so much opinions, right? So everybody has an opinion about something. So it's good to seek those feedback. It can be very formal, it can be informal, but you absolutely cannot get feedback if you only talk to yourself. If you only do your job, if you're heads down, right? The typical thing, be heads down, be the expert and do it. You're never going to get good feedback or grow. So getting your heads up, finding avenues to talk to people who are good as you are, who are better than you are, who have skills that are complementary to what you do. PMs should absolutely talk to engineers, but they should also talk to designers. They should also talk to salespeople. They should also talk to executives 10 steps, 2 or 3 levels above them. Right? You need to seek this, and absolutely not just upward feedback. You need to get it from people who look, because everybody in everywhere you're in your career, you have something that someone is admiring. Everybody wants to be where you are. And so somebody wants to be where you are. And you need to realize that. And, in the same way I say seek feedback, you must give feedback, right? Find opportunities to give it to people, but, in a formal setting, or you want to give it as a mechanism of learning, especially exactly what you're doing with this podcast, right? Is finding opportunities to get knowledge from different people, share what you've learned over your career, and hopefully help someone in the same sense. Give feedback as much as you also want to take it.
Absolutely. I want to quickly touch on your time as an executive and how decisions are being made up there, right? A lot of times those decisions are made up there, and then the rest of us, it just trickles down, and then we figure out how we'll then fit into that bigger picture. But what goes into making the decisions and figuring out where to focus on? I'll give you an example now. Like Gen AI is the big thing, right? Everyone is throwing billions and billions of dollars, right?
Yep.
What's happening in spaces like that, in those rooms that we are not privy to?
Number one thing is that nobody in the room knows. It's often, one of the things you'll learn really quickly in any room, be it a board in a startup, or you're talking to startup founders, you're talking to ICs, often people have incomplete information. But what happens in those rooms is people's intuition, and there's also a high level of confidence or appetite for risk. Right? People are comfortable taking risks, and saying tomorrow, like, we tried. We were wrong. We pivoted. You always learn when you take risk. Like, some of the mistakes are higher. Actually, a lot of mistakes are higher when you're slow and not making a decision. I would say big companies like Amazon and, take Google, for example, right? A lot of these companies are successful because all the incumbents were very slow in making decisions. So in a lot of these rooms, it's often what you see is that people have conviction, right? They have doubts, but the risk of inaction to them is often or rather, the choice to make a decision is also to self-preserve. They want to grow, they want to make decisions, they want to stay in it. So that's I think what you see in a lot of the AI space. There's a lot of learning, and I want to learn now than to learn from other people's mistakes when they've already refined and become more successful. That's what's happened in these rooms. The other part of, I think, partly related to your question, on Gen AI in particular, right? Everyone is going to be, it's like my opinion on crypto, which we talked about offline a bit, right? Everybody is going to build something. And the typical thing I say is that good, successful technology works when there's utility. It doesn't work simply because you have conviction that a technology exists. And this is one of the biggest things, like my opinion on crypto for a while, or blockchain. It's like, you can build a technology and hope to then solve it as a solution and hope to then find a problem to fit it in. You can. Maybe you might be successful. Very few of them will. But utility is often what brings the scale which you want. And you see that with ChatGPT. AI has been here for a while. Generative AI did not get invented by OpenAI, right? But once you had utility, be it through the interface of people chatting with it and asking very basic questions, it scaled. So in these rooms, people are actively thinking about, how do I bring utility to a lot of the research and investments we're going to make over the next few years? And they want that answer not 1 year from now, not in 1 year plan, 3-year plans, or 10-year plans. They want that answer in 90 or 60, 90-day cycles. What can I learn in 60 days that will help me change the direction of the decisions I make after that? What can I then apply by the 60th day mark? So we're moving faster than the way we typically have seen, companies planning 1 year, 3-year cycles. And I'm seeing that change very rapidly to these very short 30-day, 60-day, 90-day cycles where they can learn, apply, and evolve. So very critical thing I would say for anybody. You need to start thinking that same way. What can I deliver quick enough that I can course correct or double down on that decision to help the company grow?
That's beautiful. I think so. For example, I'm working on road mapping for my org, and some of the things are like, oh, maybe those things are 2026, 2027. And I'm like, yeah, anything that we're planning 2026, 2027 is probably never going to happen. Because like the cycles, when we're talking to T, for example, T was like, hey, if you're not thinking about delivering stuff in 1 to 3 months, anything beyond that, you have too many unknowns. Like, don't, you should care about it and think long term, but like in reality, focus on like, how do you iterate and like make quick decisions and get quick deliverables?
Learning phases are significantly shorter, or the expectation that you'll actually learn and evolve your thinking is significantly shorter today than I've seen for a really long time. And I think I've been working for a minute, right? So in that context, if there's one thing I can say from the closed rooms, you must start to think about it. And PMs do this a lot. You plan a full roadmap for a whole year and all these cool things. Half the time, nobody sticks to the roadmap, right? Let's assume for a second, you need to build in the conditions for you to learn enough to pivot. And, if we worked based on a plan developed 3 years ago in 2025, you'd be so far behind, right? The world has changed around us. In that same way, the world is going to change significantly faster in the next 6 months, and the same thing in 12 months. So that's one thing executives are constantly thinking about that I would encourage people to do.
I think the other thing though is, like you just said, and this is something I deal with my PM. The world is changing underneath you. You have a roadmap, and unfortunately, you can deliver on. Okay, sorry. So your resources are getting stolen for all this new stuff, but you're being judged against the roadmap that was created, right? And you're like, oh, but you didn't deliver this thing you committed to in 2026, Q3 2026, but your team delivered some other thing, but that wasn't what was on your roadmap, and they're going to be judged as not being successful. What do you think about, or how does a PM or someone that's in that kind of role manage that? And
one of the most important jobs with PM is making good trade-off decisions. Right? You prioritize your plan, but you must always do that with trade-offs. The way to think about it is not that someone is holding you accountable to a fixed plan. People are ultimately only holding you accountable to an outcome. And how you get to that outcome is often the trade-off you make. It's like, look, we plan to do 6 things, right? But we did find in month 2 that there's 2 other areas where we need to start investing now because they become more important over time. And you need to communicate that value that way. I'm going to get you the outcome. I'm not going to get it through this ABC or this 5 steps. I might get it to you faster or even, maybe slower now, but in the long term, it's the faster step, right? Through other things. So you need to frame your message in that way. Companies don't want the nice Excel sheet of Gantt chart of your roadmap. They ultimately want an outcome. And if you're thinking in the, sticking to very fixed plans, your CEO is certainly not thinking in that way, right? They want to build a business and they want to build that business now. And you need to frame your ability, like the changes in your plan in a way that shows that they're aligned to the outcome you need to ultimately deliver.
Anything else comes to mind?
Nothing else comes to mind. I don't think we've talked about. Nothing else comes to mind at the moment that we haven't already touched.
Oh, a couple additional questions then.
Yes.
What frameworks do you find? Because like you're definitely talking about spending a lot of time learning. What tools or what resources do you have to build out the mental models of how the world works? Like what processes, what structures?
Yeah, let me say something controversial, and I think I've written this before. People who read a lot do not write a lot. I don't know if this is scientifically proven, but I find that people who consume a lot of information tend not to write. So personally, I make it a discipline because I read somewhere between 5 to 6 documents a day. And these are between, 6-page documents and, 5 appendixes, right? About the whole breadth of what's happening in the world. Compliance and, just business as usual, reading P&L. But I go back and I write. And often when I write, it's just my way of keeping the things that I find are important, right? I'm not saying write meeting notes. Like, sure, do that. But I'm saying write the things you learn that if you went away 2 weeks from now and came back, those things they're still important. Like nobody ever goes away and reads a whole doc and comprehends everything, right? So in my view, keeping that little pockets of information. I think I kind of forgot what was the end part of your question? What was the end of the question?
Oh, like what frameworks or do you use to build out your mental models
of how the world works?
Of how the world works. Yep. Yeah. So in that same sense, you hear Brett, You write down the piece of information you have, right? And information is, again, often incomplete when summarized. Always true. It's never the full picture. But for me, I I listen to podcasts when I can. When you're driving, good intentions. I'm going to be in this car and I'm going to listen to all the podcasts. You listen to a quarter of it and you stop and you play it over and over and over and over. You read I'd love to read good science articles. And even today, I would say in almost every major city, metropolitan city in the US, you find that there are, let's take generative AI. There are a bunch of AI summits, workshops. Come in and listen. I spend my Friday when I have no meetings learning, right? I go into some place, some companies teaching about Gen AI or teaching about something I don't know enough about, every single facet of it. And someone is going to teach it. And I'm going to get that free education one way or the other, right? I mean, get something free, right? If someone is spending their time, might as well optimize for it. And so you have to do that in your sense and use every mechanism possible. Enter healthy debates. One of the things that you can absolutely, I enjoy. Like I always think, people spend their weekends with family and all these things that, they party and all the good things that come with life. But what I always find that I personally enjoy is listening to people and participating in healthy debates about topics that are often very controversial, right? It's like,
I think it almost helps you expand your mind and expand your viewpoint, right? It
Yes.
helps you see things in different ways that you wouldn't have if you didn't have an open mind to say, you know what, I have a strong emotional attachment in some cases to this thing. But if I was to just say, okay, you know what, let me actually listen to understand where this person is coming from. And then you just have a whole brand new perspective, right?
Absolutely. If there was ever a forum we're in Seattle. So in Seattle, where people came different backgrounds and had healthy debates, I would be the number one person there every day. Just listening to it, because you form a better sense of the world when you have two opposing views. Most of the times they're not that opposing, but two different views of a topic, right? I had this friend in the military who was also in the FBI, and you could ask her about any fact of anything in the world. She didn't know all of it, but she always knew one little part of that thing. It doesn't matter what it is, right? I did not come across anything that she didn't have some random fact about. And if you went on Google and you typed it, it was always true, right? And she's, because of her job, she spent a lot of time just scrubbing the web and learning and reading and reading and reading, and she's accumulated all this knowledge, right? And then she'll start off random debates or discussions. Like in the military, you have a lot of time just waiting. They say show up early and wait, right? Or so you're just sitting down waiting, and she just starts up. Who knows about this stuff? Like, why do you think the U.S. builds roads in this way? And then people go on, no, it's because of the weather. No, we build houses with woods, and the rest of the world builds it with concrete and all. And you go into this interesting debate, and you'll learn a whole lot of information from people, right? But my interest is mostly hearing around, tech and life and all the things that revolve around my interests. Yeah.
You had mentioned you write. What do you use to write? Do you use Google Docs? Do you use like Ulysses? Do you have a specific app, or do you just use Word?
I am tool agnostic, but I write a lot of Medium. I start writing on my notes sometimes, evolve it into Medium, or like I'm not agnostic to any tool. I haven't found any tool that I'm bound to, right? If I have an idea in my head, I always quickly write in my note, and then I might be on a plane and I'm typing up a whole doc about it.
Have you thought, I had seen this AI app, I don't know how, knowing you'll probably be, maybe you think it's cool. This AI app where it's literally what you just mentioned, where you have this idea or this thing that comes up based on some context, right? And you just give it just a little bit, and then it asks you some follow-up questions after, and then it kind of like develops an article based on what you've just said and how you're thinking about this thing. Nice. And then you can then go in and like change stuff. I found it helpful for my video ideas, because sometimes I'm just like, I learned about stored procedures in databases and I want to make a video about it. And then it asks me, what part of stored procedures? How do you want to think about this thing? How do you think about this, right? And it does, since it's AI, it does have some context, and it kind of like just fleshes out for me. So in some way, it takes out if it's something that you're going to publish, it kind of takes out the grunt work of saying, I have to fill in all these aspects, by helping you do that, yeah.
I think a supporting question to that, though, is how do you think about your writing? Do you think about your writing as clarifying your thinking, or do you think about your writing as communication? Because I think they're like two different things, and like you improve them differently. So how do you think about your writing generally?
Yeah. So I'll give this context. It depends. Depends on what I'm writing. Okay. Sometimes I'm writing. I love provocative writing. Right. I want the audience to leave disagreeing with some of the points in what I write. Okay. Intentionally so. Because what happens is you go into comments and you see those things, and then I can go back and go, oh, okay, I never thought about it this way. And I can engage in that discussion, and then I write the follow-up to it. Always. Like the article I wrote on don't follow your passion, I can tell you so. Like I think at the time I had an Instagram account of like maybe 1,000, 2,000 people, and it blew up to like 14,000 overnight off the article. Don't know who saw it, don't know who reshared it. And I said I like unfollowing people, like, I made my account private. I was like, well, I don't know all these people, right? But I write with that intent. There's some things where I have an opinion and I want to refine my opinion, so I write for that purpose. I saw an article a few days ago. A company had talked about a company that does hiring with Gen AI tools or AI tools, publishes a guideline on how to interview at the company without using AI. Or use AI in this instance, but don't use it in this instance. And I go, okay, this is a very interesting one. If your job is to help me hire and screen candidates with these tools, how then do you prevent the candidates from using the very same tools or limit where they use them, right? And I started writing about it. I haven't published it. I probably would at some point. It was one of my weekend objectives. But I write in almost all those instances. I want people to understand. I want to clarify, but I often write to get a response. Because then I can use the response to really question what I think and use that, to inform what I write the next time. And everything I write is often opinion based, right? Very clear disclaimer. This is my opinion, and it's okay to express your opinion. I actually want to hear your opinion for or against it, because then, I could just be wrong. Right? I have very strong opinions, and strong opinions often can be completely false.
Do you have strong opinions that are loosely held?
I've heard that terminology a lot. Strong opinions, loosely held. Sometimes I hold on to my opinions.
I am like that. I hold on to my opinion. I'm like, you need to explain why I am wrong. Like I sometimes when I'm in a meeting and somebody says something, I'm like, okay, so I'll tell you what my mental model is. Tell me why I'm wrong. And this is my mental model of why this stuff works this way. Tell me why I'm wrong. And let's see where that breaks. But I'm like, this is what's in my head.
I think my general consensus is as long as you're willing to have that healthy debate, as you said, and
absolutely
understand from the person's perspective, right? Not just to undo everything.
The absence of loosely holding opinions is almost ignorance. Everybody knows for sure that at some point, something you say today would evolve, or how you think about something would evolve, right? But when, people, you can say facts are immutable, or if this is true, or if this is black today, it's always going to be black. Maybe next, who knows, 3, 10, 20 years from now, it evolves into gray. So you're going to have to think about the pockets of information you don't have that could course correct your thinking. It could change the way you think. And I'm always open to those discussions, but I want to have them based on logic. I'm very logical. Yeah. And, that's a good thing for your professional life, or for never good for your personal life.
Ever. Oh my God.
Story of my life.
So you got to find, and I love to have the healthy debates where I'm logical, and this is where I think about this. And I'm always open to change my opinions, but there's some things where experience grounds some opinions that become very strongly held opinions, right? Like I would always hold some things to always be true. I think I'm the best chef. Simple as that, and that's a fact. Yeah. See, that's an opinion that I always hold strongly. It doesn't matter who it is.
That's right.
Hey. Yeah. Okay. As we're wrapping up the episode, I think I have a question. If there's a way you can kind of like summarize the major takeaways that have helped you stand out in every aspect of not just your career, but your life as well. That has kind of like made, for lack of a better way, help you get to where you are. And I think that's something that a lot of our audience would want to hear.
I think about how to phrase this. So first one first, you have to have insatiable appetite for learning. I spend every weekend I have, right? People spending, I go on the boat like everybody does in summer and enjoys the time, but I also always create time every weekend to learn. Because throughout the week, half of your schedule is not often controlled by you. So you must always create time to learn, right? And I started that long before I got my first job of building some free software for the Red Cross, and that somehow got me an interview at some company, and then that's evolved over 13 years of working in corporate America at different companies. So, but that's what's off of me learning from YouTube. Okay, so YouTube at the time. So it's sort of evolved over time. You need to seek knowledge. That's one. The second part is you have to be very bold about what you want. You cannot be quiet and expect that your growth is going to happen on your own. I talked about this earlier. There's no person waking up every day saying, I want to make you grow. You need to say, I have an appetite for growth. I have the ability to do more than I do. And I'm happy to keep doing what I'm doing right now. But I'm letting you know there is room for me to do more to help you get where you want. That's another very important. I say that, I write it in emails, and I've been very lucky to have managers who respond back and say, hey, look, I see that, right? And I want to help you get there. And last, I think maybe last point I'll touch on, you have to get away from the safety of not being liked, right? Or it's very, very important. Like, at some point, you're going to say something people don't like, and that's okay, right? Totally okay. But you have to get away from that safety, because then that gives you the ability to be bold and make decisions for yourself. Every company wants, like in Amazon, we say we hire leaders, right? We don't hire smart people to come tell them what to do. We hire smart people. We expect them to make decisions. We expect them to see problems and call those problems out, right? And if you don't do that because you're scared of saying something someone doesn't want to say, it's not really helpful for you. Same thing applies in the example you gave, actually, of going and finding people in other sister teams and talking to them, right? You need to be comfortable doing that, because people need to know you for opportunities to come to you. So I'll frame in those 3 ways. You absolutely need to learn, but most especially at the end, you cannot be shy, right? And expect that your growth is going to happen. You need to care for growth, and nobody cares about it more than you do. Not your manager, not the VP, not the CEO, nobody. Right? So you need to take that priority into your hands.
Thank you very, 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 very much for spending your Sunday evening with us. I have taken away a lot, but just on a personal level, the quickness of learning. I think I'm one to take, all right, evolve before acting. But I think what I've taken is take, act, learn, take, act, learn, take, act, learn, right? Yes, you want to think through things, but you don't want to have decision fatigue, or you don't want to absorb a lot of information and then kind of basically you don't want to find the best way to do something, right? Like there isn't a best way, right? The best way is you kind of keep evolving. That's something that I've personally taken away from this conversation. Thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching wherever you are. This has been Beyond the Build. We will catch you on the next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.